to say.
Yeah, that too.
All right, so part 2. Again, creation and chaos, and again by that I mean early stuff, the stuff associated with the beginning of the world as humanity knew it, first humans, and the Edenic situation. So there's that element, that's what I'm talking about when I use the word creation, beginnings. And chaos, of course, the first part was the unpredictable nature of the world as God left it. Again, creating a contrast between it and Eden. And now we're going to get into the creation of humankind and humanity's presence in Eden, and of course, what goes wrong there. So in Genesis 1:26, again, very familiar passage, God said, "Let us make man, humankind, in our image, in our likeness." And then in verse 27, lo and behold, we have it singularized. Okay, so here's the plural, here's the singular. And again, up here, we have, I don't want to get too far into this, but as we spent a good bit of time on this last year, there's a reason why it's plural. It's an announcement, again, to the heavenly host. But when the actual creation of humanity happens, only one deity, only God does that. So let's talk a little bit about the image and plurality and all that stuff. Preliminary observations. If you just look at that Genesis 1:26 and 28 passage, these things become apparent. Both men and women are included equally. The image, whatever that is, we'll talk about that, makes humans distinct from the rest of terrestrial creatures. It's not incremental. You either have it or you don't. Okay, they don't get the image in stages. Okay, it's just something humanity has. Makes humankind like God in some way. So the image must be something shared with God's own being and nature. It has to be congruent there. It's also shared with the us, the plural. Again, I think the most coherent view of that is that God, single speaker, is announcing his intention to the heavenly host, his divine council, saying, "I've got a great idea. Let's make humankind in our image." So he's going to be like God, he's going to be like you guys too, because you're like me, because I made you too. There's something shared going on there. So there's an announcement to a plural crowd, let's do this, but then when the time comes to actually do it, only one being has the power to do it, and that's God. That's why it's singular later on. So let's talk about what it is. I don't want to spend too much time on what it's not, but we'll try to focus on what it is. I will say this about what it's not. Since it's not incremental, since humanity must, all humans must possess it, and you don't get it in stages, any view that defines the image as an attribute or quality, even if it's connected to the brain, like the ability to think about God or pray or something like that, if you connect it to any quality that must develop chronologically, you have problems. You might as well give up your pro-life position right now, because a fertilized, conceptus in the mother's womb does not pray, does not think, doesn't do anything. And if you say, oh, well, the potential was always there, it's going to become a human being, it's going to become what am I saying? It's going to become a person. Well, when? Well, when it can do those things. And when is that? When it gets a brain. You see the problem. Then you have something that isn't human from the very beginning, even though you want it to be that way, and you're going to talk about potential. Great, we have a potential person. Thanks for that. You see where it's going.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is like the mainstream view
Yeah.
in Christian circles, and it's like, why doesn't somebody they have. There are people who object to it for the same reasons I'm objecting to it now. It's not consistent. So let's throw all that aside, and you can have any ability you want. Communication ability, sentience, whatever. None of them work because they are not always and always equally possessed from the moment of conception, just the way it is. And don't talk to me about potential persons, because why do you care about conception then anyway? So, let's talk about what it is. Think of it as a verb. Image, the word image as a verb instead of a noun. Again, part of the debate is really linked to the phrase, let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. Well, I like to illustrate the verbal idea this way. When we use the preposition in, we don't always mean the same thing by it. There's a way to understand in the image that will help us understand what is meant and will help us see it as something, as a status or something, some role, some function. If I say put the dishes in the sink, what do I mean? What am I talking about?
Physically in the sink.
A location physically in a certain, I put it in a certain place. Okay, so we're talking about location. If I say something's written in pencil, what do I mean? It's written with a pencil, so the pencil is the instrument of the writing. If I say he broke the vase in pieces, I'm referring to the result, what it looks like after the breaking. Lots of pieces. Here's what to say in reply. That denotes purpose. Here's how to say this. Here's how we're going to write what we're going to write. If I say I work in accounting, now it might mean location. There might be a physical department of accounting, or it could refer to what I do. I'm an accountant. I do what accountants do. I would say that last one is the way we need to think about the imaging idea. That humankind was created to function in the capacity, in the image of God. We're created to represent God, to do what he would do, to do what he does, that sort of thing. It's a functional thing rather than a qualitative or an attribute thing. So let us create humankind as our image, okay, in the capacity of, or as our image. And when we say that, when we refer to image as a function, what we're really saying is God creates humans to be his imagers. That's where the verbal idea comes from. So if you think of creation in the image of God, we're created to image God. We're created to be his imagers, to be like him, both with respect to the creation and with respect to other imagers. To treat them as God would treat them, to treat creation as God would treat it, all that sort of stuff. This, I think, helps us in the New Testament, again, just to rabbit trail a little bit. When Paul says that we are being transformed, okay, we behold the glory of the Lord, being transformed into the same image, what does it mean? We're becoming like Jesus, okay? Because Jesus was the image of God. Other passages have him as the express image of God. He's like the best image of God. He's like the imager of God, the image of God. What God is, what God does, how God behaves, he is the perfect example. He's the perfect imitator, perfect imager. And we're conformed to the image of his Son. It doesn't mean we all progressively start to grow beards and look like Jesus. It means we start to behave like him, and someday we will be like him. And I do think that means, post-resurrection, that our bodies are transformed to be like his. We shall be like him. We're not going to be Yahweh because we're created. Okay? We'll never be that because we're contingent beings. There's only one of those, but we'll be like him, in a significant way, both in terms of how we're transformed in physical terms and how we're transformed in spiritual terms. So all humans are imagers of God, but they all don't represent him the same way. We're able to function in God's place. We image him because we share certain attributes that are God's. Now I want to focus on one of those attributes, and that is freedom. Okay? God is free. He has a free will. He's the only being who is completely free, meaning he needs no external help. He needs no external influence. He has the perfect mind to decide what to do at all times, in all places, under all circumstances. He needs no contribution. Now God does respond to people, to prayer and things like that. But the point is he doesn't require it. He is completely free to do what he wishes. Now we share the attribute. We have a little taste of it. And I would say without it, if we lacked this attribute and others, we would not be like God. We would cease to be his imager. Therefore, I would say this freedom is essential to imaging. It's absolutely critical. Without it, we are no longer imagers. Eden and its free imagers and connections to this whole chaotic business. If we look at Genesis 2, I'm going to go through this quickly because it's pretty obvious. Here we have the Lord God planting a garden in Eden, in the east, and we have a description. Okay, Eden has geography. These are known places. Tigris, Euphrates, Pishon, Gihon, and so on and so forth. The whole point with the geography is to telegraph to us that the world was not Eden. Eden was on the world, part of the world. The entire creation was not Eden. It's something less than Eden. It's still very good. God liked it when it was all done, but it ain't Eden. Right? Therefore, what is said about Eden is not going to be true of the rest of the created world. There's no problem with chaos being part of the creation of Eden. Eden was a small locale on earth. So the rest of the globe has this characteristic of being untamed but restrained. But in Eden, everything works like it should. It's perfect. It's not going to do anyone harm. There is no element of potential disaster as far as the creation is concerned, as far as the environment. But there are intelligent beings running around Eden. Okay? Human and non-human. Eden was where God was, and so where God is, it's the best, it's the perfect environment. Now, let's talk about temples a little bit, because later on, we're going to talk about temples and tabernacles and temple of the future and all this kind of stuff. I want you to realize that temples in the ancient world had certain characteristics that are going to look awfully a lot like Eden. Because Eden is the place where God dwells, and there are parts of the description that are characteristic of other ancient Near Eastern religions and things like that, because naturally the gods live in the best place, the most lush. Think about it. This is the Middle East. Dry, doesn't rain much. You're lucky to get 3 squares a day and water. But where the gods live, man, it's just this perfect, lush garden. It's just wonderful. Okay. It's part of the reason, by the way, that the promised land that was intended to be God's abode is described as how, consistently?
Milk and
Land
honey.
flowing with milk and honey, just abundant. Again, trying to thread the idea. Where God is, man, that's the best place. That's the best place. The gods are also going to live on mountains. Why? Because they're remote. they're at a distance. It takes a journey, it takes some effort to go visit. You know. So the ancient Near East uses certain images to highlight certain aspects of the perceived relationship between mere mortals and gods, or God. Eden is also called a mountain. In Ezekiel 28, it's the mountain of God. There's no mountain here in Genesis 2, Genesis 3. But the reason that image is used is because, you know, that there's majesty, there's remoteness. It conjures up images that frame the relationship between deity and humanity the right way, puts the right boundaries there. So in the ancient world, the deity's abode was just a temple. It's where gods live. Of course it's a temple. So even if it's a garden, the garden is still a temple because that's where God lives and we worship him there, so it must be a temple. Duh. I mean, they're just thinking like this. Where the gods live, or where God lives, is where his household, his administration live. Where God is, the council is. Where the council is, God is, because they're inseparable. This is where God runs things, you know, runs the affairs of the cosmos. It's the best place. It's the place, it's the headquarters, it's the beachhead. I mean, all these metaphors, you know, we could use. They're thinking the same kinds of things. The temple was a place where heaven and earth met. Why? Because you visit the temple to interact with God. So we know the heavenly part, that's God. And when we show up there, and plus the fact that it's here on earth, you know, you got the heaven and earth conjunction, intersection going on. Temple was associated with life. Okay, it's certainly not associated with death. Why is it associated with life? Because the only explanation for where life comes from, where it came from at the beginning, and why it's sustained is God, or the gods. We don't do that ourselves. If we don't do it ourselves, I mean, we can say that creation perpetuates itself. Yeah, we can see that. But the ultimate originator is God. This is why, a little rabbit trail again, you get all these weird rules in Leviticus. Like, you know, if a male has a nocturnal emission, he's not allowed into sacred space. You gotta, you know, go home for 7 days and then take a bath. And, you know, a woman who gives birth to a child is not allowed in the sanctuary. A woman who's menstruating, not allowed in the sanctuary. Why? Because they lose 2 bodily fluids, okay, semen and blood. Why are they important? Because they are both connected to life. Gotta have blood to live. And the other one produces babies. When you lose them, that is like dying, the loss of the life force. So when you do that, you have to go through a ritual process to be made ceremonially pure so that you can approach God again. You can approach the life. The life giver wants nothing to do with death. Okay? So that by merely making you go through that little ritual, it reinforces the idea that that place is life. Anywhere that's not there isn't. My world has death in it. I lose, you know, things happen, we bleed, you know, the life force is gone. Or we can't come in contact with a corpse and then go to the sanctuary. We can't have connection to death. Again, these are all abstract ideas, but when you see them within the framework and what they're supposed to teach, the sanctuary, the presence of God is associated only with life. These little oddities fall into place because they're designed to teach very simple ideas. They just do it in kind of, to us, kind of a weird way. Temples were often oriented to the 4 cardinal points. They're oriented to every direction so that everything is covered. Okay? It just denotes totality, the 4 corners of the earth. It's a sign that everything, you could start anywhere, you know, in the earth that we know, and follow an access line in any direction, and you know where you're going to end up? Right here. Right here. This is the center. That's why later when we get a temple in Jerusalem, Jerusalem is called the center of the world. Is it is it the mathematical center? No. Who cares? That wasn't the point. The point is, conceptually, This is the center of everything. Right here, this spot. That's what they're doing. Again, they're simple ideas, but conveyed in fairly abstract ways. Eden, again, is a temple. God lives there. It's a lush, well-watered garden. Again, a mountain in Ezekiel 28. Heaven and earth meet in Eden. There's no death in Eden. Tree of life. Sustains it perpetually. Has geography, 4 rivers, 4 directions. This is all designed to say that Eden, in biblical theology, is cast as a temple. When you get to the tabernacle and the temple itself, why is it? Why are the colors what they are in the tabernacle? Why are some of the objects of the tabernacle, shaped like plants? Why does the temple get decorated with plant life? Why do we have, 2 pillar tree? It's garden imagery. It's not just like, man, this is boring, we got to dress it up. Like, who's a nice artist here? Okay. It's designed to remind you of the first temple, of Eden. This is the place where God lives. It's either a garden or a mountain. Eden, Sinai, Zion, they're playing on both images for different reasons. It's cosmic geography. In Egypt, again, just a little rabbit trail, this is why all Egyptian temples were built when you entered the front. They went up a slight incline, very, very slight incline, and this is why you have the columns that are decorated like lotus flowers and papyrus plants and all that stuff, because in Egyptian mythology, at the beginning of creation, the primeval mound rose out of the water. And the water was conceived of like the Nile, a marshy, kind of thing with plant, like reeds and stuff like that. So every Egyptian temple was a little microcosm of the first mound. So at the end, you're elevated because you're going up the mound. And at the end, they would have a little boat, okay, either a little boat or the image of the god, because the god lived there, and he used the boat to get around, because it's all water. Again, they're just very abstract ideas, but they're designed to recreate the creation story. Why do we have pyramids? The pyramid was conceived of as the first mound, the primeval mound. That's the place where life is. So the things that go into it that die, or that are dead, you do the ritual inside the burial chamber, and they come back to life, because it's where the God, all these kinds of abstract ideas are just floating around in the architecture. And the Israelite temple is no different. You just have to sort of be in tune with what they're doing. They're not just killing time. It's not like, oh, these guys are union workers, we're going to give them something to do. They're not doing that. Okay, there's a purpose behind it that's more than just economic. Okay, it means something. Now, again, to just play this out a little more, because you're going to see some of these phrases later. At Ugarit, again, some common language. The gods, El and Baal, are both, they both have houses that are described, especially El, source of the 2 rivers, midst of the double deep. Mount Safanu is Baal's mountain, also known as the Mount of the Assembled Council, the Pukru Moed. Moed is going to be a big word when it comes to eschatology, especially Armageddon. I'll give you a little hint there. God of Israel, again, Yarkatate, Safon and Safadu. They are words, same words, different languages. The word means north. If you're living at Ugarit, which is ancient Syria, the heights of the north are the range of mountains in Lebanon, and that's where that's where the gods live, way up there, the high point. But curiously enough, in Israelite religion, what gets called the heights of the north, the same phrase, the archetype Zaphon, is Zion. Is Jerusalem in the geographical north? No, it ain't even close. It's in the southern part of the Holy Land. So why do they call it the heights of the north? Because it's the cosmic north. It's the place, it's the divine abode. Doesn't matter where it is on the planet. It matters that you connect the idea, okay, the idea of, you know, the real gods don't live up there, okay. The cosmic north and geographical north to the people of the guard are, you know, sort of coincide. But the Israelite writer's saying no, the cosmic center of everything is down here. We're just going to use the same phrase so that you get the point. And this is how they telegraph ideas that don't have any like spatial logic in that case, but in terms of cosmology and the belief system, they're completely coherent. I mean, anybody who reads that knows what you're calling Jerusalem, what you're calling Zion. That's the divine center, not this place up here. Okay. And other terms, again, in Canaanite religion, El lives in a tent and a tabernacle, a house, temple. And the same terms are going to be used in the Old Testament because the logic is this is the real deity, this is the real creator, this is the real master, not the Canaanite El, but Yahweh, who is also called El, over here. So you have, again, some of the same vocabulary. And this is where the council is, because where God is, that's where the council is, because they work for him. Okay, they travel with him. It's his entourage, okay? You want to use that, or the administration. You know, he doesn't subcontract the affairs of the cosmos. I mean, it's all done right in-house, okay? Now, Genesis 2:9, we have, the tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I want to draw attention to this phrase, tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Down here we have it in verse 17. Tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Like, what is that? What is that thing? Well, I would say we can eliminate some things. Some commentators will say it has something to do with sexual activity, because after they sin, they know they're naked. Well, it's not as though God didn't want Adam and Eve to know about sex, because he told them, be fruitful and multiply. Okay, so that really isn't the point. That's not a transgression. That's what I want you to do. Okay? It's also not a reference to moral discernment, because it's gained by eating. The fact that Eve, when she gets into the conversation with the serpent, the Nakash, the fact that she, during their conversation, she knows what God told them. Now, granted, she adds a little bit to it, but she does know. And she's hesitant. That tells you right away that she knows, we're not supposed to do this. I mean, she has already. The choice is going to be rebellion. Again, the command would be pointless if the humans didn't know what disobedience was. They knew what they weren't supposed to do. So again, she hesitates. She already knows. So knowing good and evil is something also true of God and his heavenly host, because once she eats and she knows good and evil, now she's like one of us. Okay, Genesis 3:22. Let's look at it here. Serpent says to the woman, you won't surely die. God knows when you eat of it, your eyes will be open. You'll be like God or the gods. The word's Elohim. So in verse 4, verse 5, we're not sure if it should be singular or plural. When we get down to verse 22, we have one of us. So we know, this is plural up here. So it's God and the other members of the heavenly host. And now humans, after the fall, are going to share this knowing good and evil thing, whatever that is. Now, what I have here is I have a search. The exact phrase used in Genesis occurs 5 times. Here you have the Genesis references down here. You'll notice there's only one other place where knowing good and evil occurs. Deuteronomy 1. And here it is. As for your little ones, you or who you said would become a prey, and this is after when Moses is reflecting back on their failure to take the promised land, when they were afraid, of the giant clans, and we don't want to go in there, we're going to get our butts kicked. And so Moses now in Deuteronomy is looking back at that event. He says, as for your little ones who you said, would become a prey to the inhabitants of the land, and your children who today have no knowledge of good or evil, they shall go in there. To them I will give it, and they shall possess it. So the second generation of Israelites who inherit the land, they were innocent of the unbelief, the sin of their fathers. So what the phrase really refers to is, it's not knowing good and evil means to be innocent in moral responsibility, to not have been encumbered with accountability. So you can tell, if you look at it that way, when they sin, now they are encumbered with accountability. Okay, the other divine beings know what accountability is because they work for God. Okay, they know what to do and not to do. And in God's sense, He knows what it is because He has to watch what happens. Failure and success and that sort of thing, and He dispenses, the accountability. So this whole idea here, and I wanted to rabbit trail a little bit on it, because it kind of becomes confusing, and it'll relate again to freedom as we see the stuff played out. So in Genesis 3 again, we go back here, you will be like God or the gods, you'll be like the gods, knowing good and evil, and like divine beings, of which God is one. Behold, man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Point, they would be held morally accountable for their choice. That was something new. Why? Because they'd never rebelled before. They are no longer innocent. They have now come under moral accountability. Points. Adam and Eve could make free choices. It's because they were like God. They shared that attribute. That they could choose was not wrong. I mean, the ability itself wasn't wrong. But they're responsible for their choices. Just like God, again, and His non-human free agents, they know what accountability is by experience. They become like the Elohim. So there's the connection points. Other points that extend from the fall. So we have freedom, we've got moral accountability, we have I should say immortality lost, immortality gained, but that's an awkward way to put it. They become mortal, there's rebellion in both realms. Okay, this is a first. By the scriptural account, the fall is the first instance of human failure and rebellion. And by all intents and purposes, at least what we're told, it's the first time when one of God's other divine beings, the serpent I view as a divine being, I think you guys all know that already, it's the first time we have that happen in that realm as well. So we have chaos outside Eden in the sense of nature is untamed and unpredictable. Now we have chaos inside Eden because it's been infiltrated by the Nakash, the serpent, and Adam and Eve succumb to that temptation. Ramifications. Last time, again, we talked about chaos woven into creation, and the goal is that all the world will eventually become like Eden. This is why in Revelation 21:1, there is no sea. And we'll get to that again too. But the whole idea of the subduing of the dragon, the water beast, the sea, Leviathan, Tanun, all these terms. The ancient person conceived, they used the sea as an image for something uncontrolled, for kind of obvious reasons. I mean, you can't control it. I mean, it's just completely, you're at its mercy. So that was a really powerful image for them that gets used in their literature and in the Old Testament. And when you get to Revelation 21, when everything becomes like Eden again, John just throws in this little line. There was no longer any sea. If you know what that means, that's like, wow. That's a very powerful statement. Chaos of free will decisions, again, gravitating toward evil. You're going to have the redemption and the resurrection of the body. which will, again, cure the fleshly impulse. Again, this is more than Adam and Eve because they could die. You realize that in the glorified state, you're actually beyond Adam and Eve. Okay, they had what's called contingent immortality. I talked about this last year, I think. Adam and Eve could die. They were fully human. Even before they sinned, they could die. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been human. If Adam gets up one morning and he's making breakfast for Eve and he cuts himself with a knife, he's going to look down and see what? Blood. If he takes out an artery and he doesn't fix it, he's going to die. Adam and Eve, couldn't go into the water and just walk around underwater without need of oxygen. Why? Because they were human. They go swimming, they fall, hit the head in a rock, Adam rolls in. He's not going to wake up half an hour later and come out and say, well, that was dumb. He's dead because he's human. Now, we know from the story that doesn't happen. But the thing is, they were not in and of themselves immortal. Their immortality was contingent upon not being stupid, not having an accident, and not sinning. Because as soon as they sin, they are driven out of the garden. And what's in the garden that's important? The tree of life. Now, maybe that was something they ate that would maintain their life, who knows. But the fact is that Eden is where God lives, and God is associated with life. You stay in there, you live. Okay? It's again, a real simple set of ideas. When you're removed, you're going to die now. You're already, contingently immortal. Now you're out, you're really immortal. And that's one of the costs. And on top of that, you are divorced from the life force, from the thing keeping you alive. So Adam and Eve, they begin to age and they die. When we are resurrected, we ain't going to die. We're beyond that. We actually supersede that status. There's also, again, in the eschaton, the elimination of external evil influence. We're in the Edenic state. We're immortal now in terms of resurrection. Now, we're still contingent in the sense that, God could say, well, I have a new idea, I'm going to wipe you all out. Because he's God. Okay, but, we know that's not going to happen because God tells us that's not going to happen. The point is we're not little Yahwehs now, that we have our own, eternal set of attributes. But, we're in the Edenic state, we're in a perfect environment, there's no, temptation, there's no, solicitation to rebellion. We still have, our will. We're still imagers of God, but we have the perfect environment and we have nothing to solicit, encourage, prompt us toward anything other than God's will. It's the perfect Edenic state.
We have 10 minutes.
Okay. So, if we go back to part 1, why do natural disasters happen causing the innocent to suffer? Because that's the way the creation is. That's the way it was outside of Eden, and post-fall, it's even worse. Okay, there's just there's restraint. If God wasn't restraining it even now, if there weren't things in place, however that looks, however that works, it would be awful. In fact, when restraints are removed, as God describes in prophetic passages, you have what? You have great tribulation such as the world has never seen. Okay, you have these phrases. Again, a progressive withdrawing of restraint, both in terms of the natural world and, according to Revelation 9, what is opened up. The bottomless pit, the abyss. Again, these are all ideas to say it's pretty much hell on earth. Restraint is removed. Restraint over intelligent evil is removed. It's just really bad.
So the pit's kind of an anti-mountain.
What was that?
So the bottomless pit would be like an anti-mountain, the reverse of a mountain.
It is. They're viewed as diametric opposites. Yeah. In fact, the same heights of the north, you get the same phrase, Yarkate, heights of the pit. That doesn't make, how can a pit be high? Well, it refers to the extremes. Again, the polar extremes idea. What's the second reason for suffering? Well, it's intelligent evil. Free will acts of fallen human agents and evil non-human agents. Deliberate rebellion instead of imaging God as intended. That's why people suffer. That's why people do bad things. They're imagers, but they make decisions to not image God, but to either be gods to themselves or just to harm, just to do evil. Because again, there's, on this side of the cross, we would say they're lost, they're unredeemed, they don't have an indwelling spirit, and all this sort of thing, which, are all true. But the problem is even more severe than that. And why would God leave creation untamed? Because it reflects his nature. Why would God make humans free and let them make free decisions? Because they're made as his image. He's free, so they have to be free as well, to represent and be like him. To remove that attribute is to eliminate the image, and you can't have divine imaging without freedom. So humans are what they are. They are free to choose to image God, and of course now to believe in Christ and submit to the power of the Spirit. And all these are all choices. Okay? They're also free to do none of those things. So where is our hope, eschatologically? Well, the unpredictability of untamed nature, we have chaos woven into creation. God doesn't step in to change it now, but it is under restraint. And again, God says, I'm going to unrestrain it at some point, because that's part of the day of the Lord. When, all things get set right, but that means judgment and also redemption. They work hand in hand. There's suffering and there's redemption. The day of the Lord is when everything is resolved, and it involves both violence and divine intervention, and out of that comes glorification. So all these things are reversed and set right. Chaos of free will decisions, the threat of human freedom to do evil. Again, imaging is really important. Evil happens when freedom manifests as rebellion. Freedom is also necessary for true obedience. We can't forget that. So the resolution of that part, evil can end only one of two ways. Removal of freedom at the cost of imaging, and God isn't going to do that because then we're no longer human. And the second is redemption, resurrection of the body. Again, this is eschatological sense, the ultimate sense of deliverance of evil. So eliminating all the evil external influence and Satan and his angels and so on and so forth. Logical question. Is God not in control then if he does not predestinate everything? I would say God does not predestinate evil. Humans are free. He foresaw evil but didn't need it to happen to work a plan. Now I know the old explanation for this. You tell me when we stop, because I can always pick up the last slide or two. Why does evil happen? Well, some hyper-Calvinistic positions will say God does predestine evil, and he's behind it. Because they're stuck in a position that God must have control of every event, even evil acts, to be sovereign. Then there's this mediating position where, well, God saw evil and incorporated it into his plan. So, like, in other words, God couldn't think of a better plan? Right? Like God, now that God has the plan set, he needs evil to happen so that it all works? I don't think God needs evil at all. Okay, that's what I'm getting to. There's a different perspective here. And where I get that, I think 1 Samuel 23 is really important. This is the story, real quickly, of David at the city of Keilah. He delivers the city, from enemies. And while he's there, Saul hears he's there. And he goes, David is like a caged bird. Okay, I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to surround that city and put it under siege, and I'm going to get him. Well, somehow David finds out that Saul is on his way, and so he asks God, if Saul shows up here, will the men of Keilah surrender me to him? And God says, you bet. Like in a heartbeat. Like, thanks for nothing, David, here you go. Here you go, Saul. And so what does David do? I think I'm gonna get out of here. Now what does that tell us? God foreknew an event that didn't happen. That means that God's foreknowledge of an event does not necessitate its occurrence. Foreknowledge does not necessitate predestination. It just means God knows. God gives David the information. There you go, David. Now, God knows what he's going to do, but David has to do it. If he sits there, God's going to be right. Okay, he didn't foresee incorrectly. But nevertheless, there's freedom within the context of God's foreknowing. So God deemed freedom, even though it would be used for evil, essential to human existence. And again, which God is sovereign? The one who foreknew and predestinated every event of human existence, including the fall and all sins. Is that God sovereign? Well, I mean, yeah, that God would be sovereign because he controlled everything from the beginning. Is this God sovereign? The one who foreknew evil would happen as the result of sharing his attribute of freedom with humans, and so allowed humans to do sin, all the while steering free human choices toward the final ends of human history that he did predestinate. Which God is sovereign? They both are. What I'm suggesting is that this one is more reflective of biblical theology than that one. You still have a sovereign God. You just define sovereignty as the ends to which all things go. And this one has everything up front. It's front-loaded. Which is the better chess player? The guy who makes you move every move and then he's just going to make you lose? Or the guy who says, it doesn't matter where you move, I'm going to win? I mean, that's the analogy. Which one is like the better player? Front-loading or back-loading. So, it's determinism versus eschatological predestination is what I like to call it. The ends are predestinated. That's a big term, I know.
We like it.
Okay. Have a minute, or should we skip to the summary to begin next time?
29, it's 12:29 right now.
All right, well, just a quickie here. Evil exists because free will is essential for being an imager. An image refers to representing God as co-rulers with him, co-administrators. The image doesn't need evil to be a reality. Imaging preceded the fall. God's intention was to rule his creation through these proxies, through these imagers. And eschatologically, evil will be eradicated. There will be no enticement to sin. And all the earth will be transformed to an Edenic state. But that's not going to happen until there's a battle with intelligent evil. That just has to happen. Why? Because some free will imagers are evil. Human and non-human. It's bound to happen. It's inescapable. Okay, we'll can it there.